All right, hi guys. Video lecture this time on Dylan Thomas. His years, because we always start with those, 1914 to 1953. Not nearly a long enough run, unfortunately. Thomas famously is Welsh. This technically makes him British, although depending on who you ask, in Wales, I suppose, maybe not as much these days, historically would maybe not necessarily consider themselves British. Welsh would be the more accurate descriptor. Anyway, he is, strangely enough, discovered by way of a poetry competition for a popular newspaper. This does not matter much at all when it comes to understanding his poetry, but it's an interesting bit of trivia, I suppose. You could argue, maybe a little bit, that it's kind of telling in the way that he fits into the rest of the canon, which is to say he's a bit of an outlier in some ways in his own era. More on that in a little bit. Anyway, his style, which I think some of you might appreciate, harkens back to the Romantics, primarily due to the forcefulness of his verse. To make that less fancy, he has like a sweeping sense. Like you can get caught up in his poems really easily. At least a lot of them. There are exceptions to this, of course. I don't know. Like, for instance, my wife actually has a couple lines of his tattooed on her arm that are pretty banger lines. But the emotion that's sort of palpable in those poems just kind of stands out against a lot of the other people writing at the time. On the one hand, to think about some of his themes, I guess, he writes about the cyclical nature of life. And this is really cheesy nowadays because we have a really cheesy example. But if you think back to The Lion King, the whole circle of life business, it's kind of that, actually. But he said it way better. I have a quotation from him. Each image, like of his, holds within it the seeds of its own destruction. So, well, on the one hand, maybe even in The Lion King, the circle of life has this positive spin where, yeah, things die, but they also feed things that come after them, and he's into that too. You could read it the other way, which is, for all that we have and everything that's born, it will also die. So there's that. His poems, by and large, are more hopeful than all that, though. You'll see. His images, by and large, this is just interesting, are taken from Welsh folklore, the Bible, and Freud. Freud is really big around about the turn of the century. Guys like Dylan Thomas are going to pick up on that. They're going to be reading those things, obviously. So it can come in. We're not going to talk about psychoanalysis, mostly because I hate it, but you could argue it's in some of his stuff, maybe a little bit. All right, I got to turn the page. All right, so all that stuff about the cyclical nature of life and how you could read that both positively and negatively if you wanted to. That's on the one hand. On the other, he is more than a little shattered by the death of his father, actually. So there's an interesting thing to be said, because we're going to read Do Not Go Gentle, which is a villanelle about his father. There's a thing to be said for sort of pseudo-pragmatically conceiving of the world, conceiving of existence. These are really lofty ideas. And then just the very human process of grief that I think you could pretty easily argue is expressed in that poem. And we'll almost certainly have to talk about it. So there's that. Dylan Thomas famously dies from alcohol poisoning not too long after his father, actually. Some people link that to grieving for his father, but to be fair, he had always kind of lived that way anyway. So, you know, I hate to supply easy answers for some, especially when it comes to someone's death. The other way to think about all that, he read and lived to a point bombastically. What that means is, and this comes through in a lot of his poems, like Fern Hill, Green Fuse That Drives the Flower. Like, these poems just read really big. I use the word bombastic. You'll see the word violent thrown around. It's not like there are violent images in his poem in like the way that you're probably thinking, but like there's a force to them. And I would assume, because I wasn't around to see any of those, that he read in that way too. He's pretty famous for this. So much so that guys that would come after him, like Larkin, who we're reading next, and Larkin is amazing, would say that Thomas was overrated. And he still kind of has that rap now in some circles. Like I had two professors who I respect deeply, and they respect each other deeply, but one of them is a huge Dylan Thomas fan, and the other one, when he would talk about Thomas, is like, well, he's good and he's worth reading, but like, eh. So it's kind of maybe a styles make fights sort of thing. Like you're into him or you're not. I think Thomas is amazing. He speaks to me deeply. I guess we'll see how you feel about him. Anyway, I guess the last thing I'd say about that, sort of on that note, I mentioned before, he kind of stands out. He stands against a lot of what poetry was doing at the time. We didn't read really any of the moderns like T.S. Eliot or any of those guys because, you know, no hate, but you're just not ready for them. But it can be pretty obtuse, and it can, like T.S. Eliot famously wrote The Wasteland, which is kind of there in the title, like the world in and around the world wars is a wasteland, literally and figuratively. And what possibility for like hope or anything is in that. A guy like Thomas comes along and sort of flies in the face of a lot of that. Auden, who predates Thomas by just a little bit, not a ton, leans more toward a guy like Eliot in a lot of ways, but Auden has this like hopefulness too, that you could argue maybe presages Thomas a bit. But, and again, you'll see this when you read Thomas, reads very differently from Auden. Auden is much more reserved and cautious when it comes to that hope, that optimism. Thomas, like, it's just bleeding out of every pore in a lot of his poems. And then after that, we'll get to Larkin. And Larkin has a glimmer of hope here and there too. And he's easier to read than Auden, probably for you guys, but he feels more like Auden than he does Thomas. So the final thing I wanted to say is Thomas really is like a bit of an outlier in his own time. He feels more romantic than a lot of these guys. And I think that's what made him popular at the time, is what continued to make him popular. But in some circles, he gets a bad rap for that. Like people feel like, I don't know, it's almost like in our day and age, and even in all the way back to Larkin's day and age, there's this cynicism, this assumption that to exude that kind of forcefulness, which you could read as hopefulness, they don't read it necessarily as disingenuous, but like people like it because it's more surface level. I get people in the 20th century and into our own century have been distrustful of that hopefulness, that forcefulness. But I think a guy like Thomas can do it and mean it. I think the poems are really good. I think you guys are gonna like them. I hope you do. Hope you read them. I guess that would be step one. Let's cross that bridge. All right, thanks.